Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Scarzig, and today I want to talk about the new mechanic being added to Legends of Runeterra. Alright everyone, welcome in. The mechanic I wanted to talk about in today's video is Prank. This is a new spell that was added in the Bandle City expansion, and there is a batch of followers that generate this spell. You can't main deck it, but the cards that do give you copies of this are pretty strong in their own right. So quickly, I want to cover those. There is the Otterpuss, a 1-mana 1/1 with a tune, so it's going to give you the mana to cast the copy of Prank that it does give you. Kelp Maidens, a 2-mana 2/1 with Nexus Strike, create a Prank in hand. So you're going to get that repeated generation of that resource a la Zoe. At 4 mana, it goes up to Benemone. When I'm summoned, create 2 Pranks in hand. And so the Prank, again, a 1-mana spell that allows you to look at one of 2 non-champion cards in an enemy's hand or deck and prank it. You get to actually look at 2, and you get to pick one of them. The pranks are random negative effects that you can put on the cards in the opponent's hand. If their hand is empty, the prank will then go onto their cards in their deck, which is a little bit less useful, of course, but a potential for a Bilgewater, Bandle City, like early semi-aggressive deck to have this level of an early curve coupled with disruption can prove to be pretty infuriating. I know that the developers have already mentioned a lot on Twitter that they did a lot of playtesting with this mechanic internally, and that it turned out to be, just pretty fun, not too mean, just like a harmless prank. I'm really wondering if it's going to end up that way. I think that Prank as a mechanic, mathematically, is not going to be as impactful as it seems at first glance, but because of the ability for this mechanic to kind of throw off your early game and screw you over, I think that a lot of players might just get too tilted, and even if the prank would have not ended up mattering in the long run, they might just concede, and we'll never know. I think it kind of gives me vibes of Nab from back in the day, where it was a mechanic that, when Nab was really obnoxious and you were stealing tons of cards from the opponent, and you were dying to the fact that your opponent had extra random removal or extra minions or extra copies of Atrocity and things like that, players would just roll their eyes and say, well, I mean, every time your opponent would nab a really good card, they would also be nabbing, sometimes they would just nab useless cards. And, there was obviously some fallacies in that argument too. And I think that Prank is going to be occupying a similar space where the impact of disrupting your opponent's hand is going to, don't get me wrong, it's going to be very meta dependent, but the fact that you can just sort of auto win against certain decks by taking away a key card or disrupting a deck that needs to get on board early in order to facilitate its win condition. And I suppose that carries me over to the question that a few of you have probably already been asking: what do the pranks even do? We have a loose list posted by Deadbolt Doris of the dev team. I don't believe this is an exhaustive list. They do say that this is simply a loose list. For units, if you prank them, you can give them +2 mana cost, -2 power, or -1 power and it can't block, or -1 power and grant vulnerable to the unit. So if it's a spell or a landmark, you can increase the mana cost by 2. And just by reading those out loud, a few of you might be squirming in your chairs and cringing, thinking of the nefarious, outcomes that can certainly happen if your opponent hits the Otterpuss on 1 and you don't have a 1-drop, and then they play the prank, and suddenly your 2-drop you were planning on playing costs 4, right? Or your 2-mana 2/2 or your 2-mana 2/3 gets -2 power, so then you have a 0/2, or any of those hitting your 2-drop is just ridiculous, right? just to kind of keep you out of early game board contention. You will still have a chump blocker, hopefully, at the very least, but again, an aggressive Bandle City Bilgewater deck, I think, is what really comes to mind for me at first. But this has implications for maybe slower control decks as well, where the pranks just take a lot of threat away from your opponent's curve and your opponent's minions, where they have less power to keep you under pressure, they cost more so your opponent just can't curve out, and when they do, it's still taking tons of mana away from them. It allows you to get to your mid game a lot safer, curves into things like Aloof Travelers, another card that players have been very concerned about, the new Bandle City 4-mana 3/4 that draws both players a card and then makes the opponent discard their highest cost card, with potentially increasing the mana cost of your opponent's cards using Prank. You can further manipulate what your opponent might discard, and Prank, can't affect champions, but Aloof Traveler can. And again, you can sometimes just win games just by the fact that your opponent cannot effectively, get on the board in the mid game. All of their combat tricks or synergies that they're relying on could be too heavily disrupted to matter. We've seen before when it comes to nerfing certain cards that by delaying things by a round or two, can spell the difference between a thing being very overpowered and a thing being perfectly balanced. And so if you take something that's somewhat balanced and you delay that further by 2 rounds, then it gives you so much breathing room to either smork them down, or perhaps in the case of a control deck like a Bandle Tree, could really put in a lot of work as well. And even if these decks aren't very strong, I think that it's just going to be so infuriating to be on the receiving end of multiple pranks that that players just simply aren't going to want to play the game. Even when you win, you're still going to be tilted. It was the same way with Nab, and a lot of players are really not looking forward to the prank package and also Aloof Travelers potentially being meta relevant picks. The developers have further clarified that pranks can stack on the same card, but the mana increases cannot increase the cards beyond playability. So you can't increase a unit past 10 mana or spells past 13 mana to keep them from being played at all, which is a nice, just a nice safety measure. The other thing I have yet to touch on is that you do get to look at 2 cards in the opponent's hand and then pick one. So aside from the disruption, you're also getting a lot of information about what your opponent has in their hand. Even outside of the early game where you're disrupting, if you want to just pay 1 mana to take a quick look at what your opponent has, just to maybe scout out a little bit or maybe turn off the possibility of a certain spell, like imagine pranking and hitting a deny, for example, or a rite of negation. Suddenly you don't have to worry about that. Another major player in the metagame right now are combat tricks like Twin Disciplines or Sharp Sight. If you hit those and increase their mana cost by 2, suddenly you can attack or defend yourself in a safer fashion. So I think that, again, Prank, there's a lot of scenarios where it can be quite powerful. I don't imagine that the overall just you get pranked on turn 1, you should concede is going to be, the final verdict on this mechanic. But a lot of players just don't want to put up with that sort of gameplay, right? Even if it doesn't matter in the long run, being put off of playing your fun combo or curving out or like mulligan or drawing into a really strong hand and having that disrupted and having that joy taken away is just going to feel so bad. And I think that Prank is a mechanic that really can't, it's supposed to be a fun mechanic. The devs said they had a lot of fun when they were testing it internally, but I can't see this being fun for anyone that's on the receiving end. I suppose that if you are playing an incredibly aggressive deck and you empty your hand, the prank suddenly doesn't matter as much. But there is still the potential for the pranks to start hitting cards in your deck. I can imagine if you were playing something like Pirate Aggro, you play out all your 1 and 2 and 3 drops and your hand is empty, and then they prank and they start to hit your Decimates or your Noxian Fervors, the cards that you kind of need to close out. Or simply if P&Z Bandle City, or heaven forbid Ionia Bandle City Elusive, becomes a deck, then the ability for them to protect their units with Ionian's already strong disruption and combat tricks, and then combine that with Bandle City's disruption, means that even if you have the cards and mechanics in your list or in your regions to deal with a deck like that, you still might get put off by a couple rounds. And just like the continuous generation of pranks from Kelp Maidens means that even though these units look pretty understated on the surface, when your opponent is playing at, -2 mana to keep up with your curve, you're going to get in a lot more chip damage before your opponent has a chance to stabilize. And I guess that's really all I have to say before I just end up repeating myself. The mechanic, I am not looking forward to it. I really hope it ends up being bad, no matter how strong a thing looks like it might be on paper, depending on how the meta shapes up, depending on, various things. These cards could not be strong enough. They could not see play. Maybe there's simply a better early game Bandle City package that's yet to be revealed that people are just going to run instead for more consistent value rather than disrupting what the opponent might be doing. But that's the best case scenario. So let me know what you all feel about this mechanic in the comments below. Are you looking forward to playing some pranks? Are you going to quit the game? Do you think this needs to be pre-nerfed? Are you going to wait to see if there's a full list of prank mechanics, or are the ones that we know of right now still scary enough to sour your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. And I will see you all in the next video. Have a good one.